Introducing Royal Caribbean's newest ship, Icon of the Seas, the ultimate family vacation. The ultimate 6 slides, 8 neighborhoods, 0 compromise vacation. The ultimate never done that, can't wait to do it vacation. The ultimate chillin' by a different pool every day of the week vacation. This is the Icon of Vacations. Icon of the Seas, arriving in 2024. Book today. Come seek the Royal Caribbean. Ships Registry, Bahamas.
This episode is brought to you by Pepsi Wild Cherry. Pepsi Wild Cherry is bursting with delicious cherry flavor and a sweet, crisp taste that gives you more to go wild for. Getting wild may look different these days, but whether it's opting for a solo Friday binge watch or a big night out, everyone can indulge in their wild side with Pepsi Wild Cherry. Also available in 0 sugar. So grab a Pepsi Wild Cherry and get wild.
Hey there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 587 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. It is Sunday, January 28th, 2024, and I don't know if you've exhaled yet, but that was a very close game yesterday that we have to recap here on the Duke Basketball Roundup. Before we get into all that, I am Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. Jason's still out somewhere in the South Atlantic. I'm here again with Scott Rich. Scott Rich, what's up, man? Good morning. It's a big day for us.
Recovering from yesterday's Heartstopper, and then hopefully another Heartstopper of a game this afternoon for the Lions. If it's a Heartstopper, I think the Lions are in good shape.
We're somehow built for that. But yes, I did not think yesterday was going to be the Heartstopper of the weekend, but here we are. 72-71, the final score. Tyrese Proctor's 2 free throws with 0.4 seconds left are what seals it for the Duke Blue Devils. They moved to 15-4 on the season, 6-2 in the ACC. This is a game that was back and forth. Scott, 12 lead changes, 11 times the game was tied. There is a point where we were down 4. We had 3 steals from Jared McCain in 56 seconds, and then it still wasn't over until, as we mentioned, the very final whistle. And you know what? We'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's first get into some of the headlines that people had. I got a lot of them after the game. Of course, there was one that came in at halftime in this game. And I'm like, man, person who sent in at halftime missed a lot of the second half, because the second half.
That's a lot of faith right there.
Yeah, that's a solid faith, and I appreciate it. But man, that was a lot. I mean, that was a lot, especially with this game and how it was going on. Tom Wildermuth, I think, had the best one. He just goes in all caps, Australia only serves ice water. Of course, relating to Tyrese Proctor's clutch ice veined free throws at the very end. Josh Levinson, he had Devils nearly stall until Proctor's shots fall and the defense stymies Hall. I thought that one was good.
That's good. We're going with some rhymes as opposed to some alliteration. We've got some variety here.
Absolutely. We have Eric Bishop. Eric Bishop just simply put, I have no more nails to bite off. That sums up this game quite well. And John Grantlin always writes in with good ones. He said, hold that Tiger. Proctor's threes send Tigers ragged, tagged, and bagged. What do you think, Scott?
Oh, I mean, I'm not even going to try the best any of those. The rhyming is just top notch, next tier after the pattern of alliteration on the pods I've been on. So I'm not even going to try to best any of those. Those were fantastic.
Yeah, they were good. Shout out to everybody who wrote emails, wrote headlines. And again, you can write them to dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Of course, we have a game in less than 48 hours, or a little bit more than 48 hours. We will be done with a second game of a back-to-back. We will talk about Virginia Tech after the break. But first, let's get into this Clemson game. Again, 72-71, the final score. And Scott, I'm going to let you take the good here. I'm going to let you start with the good. There was a couple of different places we can go, but what do you have? What was the top thing that you think helped win this game for Duke?
Look, I think a theme of this game is there were some very obvious things that we'll talk about. Tyrese Proctor at the end of the game. But I think there were a lot of under-the-radar storylines that will potentially get overlooked based off of the end-of-game chaos. I think one of those from the good is Mark Mitchell had another fantastic first half. He had 10 points, I think, about midway through the first half. He was the Mark Mitchell that we were expecting coming into the year. And that continued in the second half. There was a concerted effort to get Mark Mitchell the ball on the post. When he and Ryan Young were in the game together, especially when Kyle had his foul troubles, there was a lot of high-low with Ryan at the high post, feeding Mark at the low post. That seems to be a new element of the game plan that John has implemented that's working. We talked on Thursday about how important it would be to get the bigs of Clemson in foul trouble. And that ended up being a storyline perhaps later than we expected. But it was less Kyle Filipowski doing that and more Mark Mitchell doing that. More Mark Mitchell getting in the post on Ian Shefflin and drawing some of those fouls as opposed to Kyle. I like that. I like that sort of inverted look that we do with either Ryan or more often Kyle. We're basically saying Mark Mitchell's shot is what it is. Let's get him the ball where he can operate, where against most teams he's going to have a mismatch. Unless we forget, Mark was 1 for 1 from three. He sunk the corner three that he was making all last year. So again, small sample size. All his 3-point shooting is going to be small sample size, but anything that he's making is going to be, momentum going forward. So again, not the headline Mark Mitchell's performance, but I think a really important subplot, especially for this team's long-term aspirations.
And an interesting thing about that 3-pointer is, again, early in the game, he had a shot in the corner where he could have taken it, and the defense came out and the defender kind of, ran out to put a hand in his face. And like halfway through, you kind of feel the defense go, oh, wait, this Mark Mitchell, he's not going to shoot the three. But before he could do that, Mark Mitchell had already pump faked and drove along the baseline. And I think he got a shot off and missed it. But it was one of those plays where, hey, just him being able to tell people, hey, I made this three, or even just like, from months past or a month past where he said, hey, I hit a couple threes, was just enough to give him that token defense. When he hit that three in the corner, the defense has started to slide back a little because at a certain point they're like, oh, he's not shooting this because every time we give him the ball in the corner, he's pump faking and driving to the lane. So let me just back off a little bit. Then he hits the corner three again. It keeps the defense honest on him. And that's what we want from him, because when he's able to do that, then he's able to cook on the inside, as you mentioned during the game. I want to talk about the player who I thought for the entire stretch of the game was the most consistent at being present in this ball game, and that's Jared McCain. Jared McCain, 21 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 3 for 7 from 3, and as I mentioned at the top, 3 huge steals in 51 seconds late in the game to help Duke at that point, who was down 4, come back and take the lead. And of course, this game went back and forth. But Jared McCain, there were points during this game where I was texting some of my friends and I said, Jared McCain is the only one playing this ball game right now. He was active on defense. He was making the shots, taking the shots on offense. And even when he wasn't making threes, right? He missed 4, but it felt like, and the team wasn't, for a team that was shooting, almost 50% for the game from 3, we missed a lot of open threes. So it felt frustrating at a time. This game did not come easy to us, and that's credit to Clemson and just them trying to take us out of our game. But Jared McCain the whole time was even-keeled Jared McCain that we've been told by many people is who he is. He was level-headed. He was able to get make the moments when we had them. He was able to make threes when we needed them. He's, again, on defense. He was able to grab rebounds. He was able to make steals when we needed them. And I felt like he was ever present in this game. And I think the rest of the team, at a certain point, there was a point where like, oh, it's like they're not on the floor, right? We saw some guys had some struggles, but even the guys who had decent, good games, Jared McCain, I think, was the only one that was throughout the entire game. I knew that Jared McCain was on the floor. He was active, he was energetic, and he was trying to make a play.
It's interesting if this Duke team is healthy, Jared McCain's probably number 4 on the opposition scouting report. You're probably thinking about Tyrese Proctor and Jeremy Roach and Kyle Filipowski before Jared McCain. And if you're doing that, you're going to be in trouble, because the very high-level scouting report is Jared McCain's a pretty darn good shooter. But he's shown over this last stretch that he is so much more than the shooter. His creativity around the rim for someone who's only 6'2", his size, is extremely impressive. The scoop shots that he's making consistently, add a whole nother element to his game. So again, if he's number 4 on the scouting reports, probably not going to be there for much longer the way he's playing, but he's going to keep having those opportunities on really hard closeouts. He's going to have opportunities to attack the basket when teams are just, coming up on him really, really tight on defense. And he's making teams pay for that. He's making teams pay quickly, decisively, and with confidence. And especially with the injuries, especially with, Jeremy Roach, really a shell of himself all game. We don't know how long that injury is going to last. Tyrese is still, sort of recovering from that ankle sprain, which can linger. We need that Jared McCain. And as you said, he was the only guy who played at his top level from start to finish yesterday, which was a huge, huge factor in Duke pulling out the win.
I think the thing about his ability to create and score on the dribble drive is probably the most surprising thing this year, because we talked about, before the season, everyone's like, this dude can shoot from anywhere in the gym, and he's proven that he can do that. But the way that he gets to the rim, and also, as you mentioned, the way he's able to create shots, he went down in one play and he kind of did that scoop shot that went off the backboard. The next drive, he did the same drive, and the guy was like, oh, the scoop shot, ready for it. And he did another scoop shot that was from a different angle that hit the backboard at a different angle and still went in. And again, when you do that, when you're able to kind of, offer some deception with your dribble drive and create your shot, he doesn't need that much space, whether he's shooting the ball or whether he's driving. And I think that's the most important thing, is that even in traffic, as you mentioned, he still found his way to the basket and able to get a shot off and get it on frame, where even if he's missing it, you have a Mark Mitchell or hopefully a Kyle Filipowski there to rebound and, go up with a second chance point. So I really appreciated that. I think we got to talk about the man with ice water in his veins, Tyrese Proctor, because he had some huge, huge threes, 4 for 6 from 3. He's at 18 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, and 2 massive free throws at the very end when we were down 1. He goes up and we should talk about it now because everyone else seems to be talking about it. Tyrese Proctor, of course, drives. He gets the ball coming up the block. We're down 1. PJ Hall has just sunk 2 free throws to give Clemson the lead, and he comes down. He gets around his defender, and his defender, first of all, chops him on the shoulder, or at least on the arm, as he's dribble driving and trying to, switch the ball from his left hand to his right hand. He gets the ball into his right hand despite that, and then goes up for the shot, gets the foul drawn, and it was a foul. First of all, he got hit in several places on the arm, on the shot and before the shot. And I know Clemson and Brad Brownell was furious about that after the game, but look, that's a foul on any street corner. That's a foul on any block. That's a foul on any gym in America. And that's a foul. Even if I know Roger Ayers was calling another game because I was watching it, but Roger Ayers would have called that foul. TV Teddy would have called that foul. So this is not something where there was a whole Duke gets all the calls moment. This was a Clemson fouled Tyrese Proctor moment. And of course, Tyrese Proctor knocks down those 2 free throws. And then Mark Mitchell on defense stands where he needs to on the inbounds play. Of course, they have to do some wild, throw down the floor. And PJ Hall runs into him, asks for the foul, doesn't get it. Mark Mitchell has every right to that basketball, as well as PJ Hall. PJ Hall has to run through Mark Mitchell to get his place of the ball. And that's ball game. I know Clemson might be upset about it. I know Joe Girard had to be restrained by his coaching staff after the game. I don't know what he was going to do to the refs. That
was my thought too. Is what is his plan here?
Yeah, what was your plan? I don't know what you planned on doing. He got a little bit of that from his old buddy Jim Boeheim up in Syracuse. Done that before in Cameron. But I think at the end of the day, Tyrese Proctor should be the story here. It's not the foul that was called on him. It was the fact that he played well throughout the game. And again, when we weren't making free throws, and we'll talk about that, he made 2 massive ones to seal it.
So I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here. I agree with you 100% on the Mark Mitchell thing at the end. That was offensive pass interference. Mark Mitchell had his position. He didn't go into PJ Hall. PJ Hall backed into him, and it looked bad because there were bodies flying. But
Right.
Mark Mitchell had his position established. There's no controversy on that in my end. On the Proctor play, the foul on the shot was a foul, 100%. Beforehand, I don't think that was a great last possession. I don't. I think that so, and I think that he didn't quite get past his defender as much as he just sort of tried to bully ball in. It never felt like Tyrese was trying to score as much as he was trying to get fouled.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's a small quibble on a possession that ended up winning Duke the game. But it sort of seems like this team has some gap in their knowledge and their experience about how to attack short shot clock, end of half, end of game situations. There was something lacking in that last possession. And I think that's part of why there was this backlash, because it was such a really, really ugly looking play, right? You know, you said it looked like he got fouled driving in. That I'm not so sure about. I think people were right that Tyrese initiated some of that contact. On the shot, 100%, he got hit on the elbow. I used to ref youth basketball back in my younger days. And even then, when I was, reffing, 7th and 8th graders, I would get trained to, let things go at the end of the game that you would otherwise. I refuse to do that, to be quite honest. I hate that. I think a foul is a foul. The time of the game doesn't change the rule book, right? But regardless, there is that tendency and that pattern of, oh, okay, you let things go at the end of games. So I think that's where that attitude is coming from the talking heads, from Brad Brownell. Again, it's
the let the players win theory, right? Like, let the players win it. Don't let it be won by a foul call, which, hey, look, we've had some non-calls happen, right? Like that Virginia game last year with Kyle Filipowski just getting basically thrown into the fourth row, like, and then getting hurt in the process. Like, those, I mean, it happens on both ends. I think the issue is, it wasn't a good execution of the play, but sometimes the lack of execution is what leads to the foul that leads to, you getting to the line, right? Like, it wasn't like a bailout call. It was a foul.
Oh yeah.
But the foul was kind of the catalyst. The catalyst was the fact that Tyrese Proctor didn't execute that play well. But I feel like in a game where nothing came easy for the Duke Blue Devils, winning it didn't come easy too. And even that play didn't come easy.
Oh, definitely. And despite my, over analysis there, Tyrese deserves all the credit in the world for being strong enough to keep possession of the ball to battle through that. Live watching that game, I was thinking, we're not going to get a shot off here. That's what that possession looked like. So all the credit in the world to Tyrese for having the strength and the ball handling skills to get through that and to get something off. And then obviously, again, you make those 2 free throws. That's clutch. That's hard to do. Doesn't matter if you're a 50% shooter or a 90% shooter. He took care of business, just like PJ Hall took care of business in the previous possession, just like Kyle Filipowski finally took care of business, making the and one on the possession before. So, as you said, it wasn't pretty. There are things that, I would hope John Shire would take as some coaching moments from how to execute in that situation that, are taken an abstraction from what actually happened. But again, if you show that clip and you don't show the clock, 90% of refs think that's a foul. If you show it in context, it becomes a talking point. So I think that that's something that'll get blown over. I think Brad Brownell's, frustration during the press conference was a little odd hill to die on, when there were so many other factors that led to that game being won by Duke and lost by Clemson. But again, thank goodness it happened. I don't care how pretty it is. I don't think you care how it looked. Duke got the win that it needed to keep so many of its aspirations still in goal.
It was low-hanging fruit, right? Like, he knew, how do you keep this relevant? I can just talk about that final play, and that'll be what's talked about on College Game Day and SportsCenter and all that. And sure enough, it was. It's no secret. Everyone has a script to how to get on SportsCenter after a controversial call at the end of a Duke game. So I think the last thing I have in the good is I want to credit our defense because, again, in a game where the offense did not come easy, we made it where it was very hard for Clemson to score as well. The final score being 72-71 doesn't really indicate how, how we were on defense. We held them to 29% from the floor in the first half, 38% for the entire game. We held them 30% on threes. I think when it came down to it, Clemson had to work just as hard for their points as we had to work for our points. And that's a testament to, quite a few guys, again, Jared McCain with the steals, Jared McCain on the steals, Mark Mitchell on defense. And I thought our perimeter defense, again, limiting in their threes. I know Joe Girard got a few of them, but other than that, it didn't really feel like there was a guy out there that was PJ Hall had a couple, but like there wasn't a guy that was out there actively killing us from beyond the arc. And I think, shooting 30%, again, you mentioned Clemson will look at that final play, but they had plenty of opportunities to win this ball game on the floor, and our defense kept us in it and kept them out of it.
Two subplots. Again, I've got a little bit of a theme here that this episode, but they sort of go under the radar. We're probably going to talk about Kyle and his foul trouble in the bad section of the game. He also had 4 blocks in this game. He also he only played 24 minutes because of that foul trouble, but he was a +9 while he was on the court. I thought this might have been one of Kyle's best games. Not only did he have those 4 blocks, but there were a lot of shots that he was contesting and he was altering at the rim. He's 7 feet tall. We don't talk about that enough. You don't have to be able to jump out of the gym like Derek Lively to affect people at the rim when you're 7 feet tall. He did that while he was on the floor. Again, he's got to be able to stay on the floor, but that was something that contributed a lot to PJ Hall's slow start, something that, again, gets lost in overanalyzing the final 2 minutes of the game. The other thing, Sean Stewart played 7 minutes today. The first 5 of those minutes were really good. The first 5 of those minutes, especially in the first half, when, again, we saw this big lineup with Flip, Stewart, and Mitchell, he was playing very, very well defensively. He's showing that he really is a 1 through 5 switch defender. He is probably, I think he might be Duke's best one-on-one defender right now. The issue is the last 2 minutes in the second half were a little bit ugly. He missed a couple defensive assignments. He essentially was indirectly responsible for a turnover where Tyrese Proctor was expecting him to come out and set a screen that he didn't, and there was this miscommunication that led to a travel. That's something that he has to continue to learn, those, the switches and the defensive assignments and rotations. He's still learning. But when it comes to, okay, if there's a pick and roll switch, can Sean Stewart defend whoever he switched onto? The answer to that question is yes. And I think that, again, if Duke can sort of manage his minutes smartly and put him in positions to succeed, put him in sort of low leverage situations as opposed to situations where a missed rotation is going to cost them the game, I think his minutes are going to keep going up down the stretch. And again, I sort of said this on Thursday. He gives Duke a changeup. His presence in the lineup is a different look that I think is something that could win Duke a game or two down the stretch. So it's something to keep an eye on, is how John Shire continues to utilize and maximize Sean Stewart's unique capabilities.
So I think those two are a nice segue from the good to the bad. I want to go back to what you said about Kyle Filipowski. You said Kyle Filipowski had one of his best games. I think Kyle Filipowski had one of his best games defensively. I think offensively, it was a problem. 2 for 8 from the floor. He missed a lot of free throws. He got to the line 11 times, but he only made 5 of them. He was 0 for 3 from 3-point. Like you mentioned, all of his stats really are on the defensive end. He had a steal. He had the 4 blocks. He had 4 rebounds, but even the 4 rebounds is a little low. And he struggled the entire game. And with the foul trouble, with playing that defense, I think even when you talk about some of the defensive stands that he did have, he had to work hard to get there. And it seems lately that offensively, Kyle Filipowski, after he had that game where he was near perfect, right? Like he hit all his threes, he was near perfect from the floor. He hasn't been the same Kyle Filipowski on offense since then. He's had to work much harder for what we get. And this is something that we feel like we've been prepared for, right? It happened last year during the ACC. There was a point where, he had that game. I forgot who it was. If it was Virginia. Oh, it was Virginia. He had 0 points, but he should have had 2 or at least 1 because he should have gone to the line. And after that game, he realized, well, the ACC is just way more physical than I expected it to be, and I need to be mentally ready for that. He mentioned that and then went on a tear after that. And we never had to hear about Kyle Filipowski being, dumb on offense for the rest of the season. I feel like we need to have that conversation again with him. Like, hey, the ACC is physical. The ACC is going to grind you up. They're going to try and get you out of your game. They're trying to get you off the court so that they can take advantage of whoever else is in the game because you are the best player in the conference. You are one of the best players in the country. And every night, unfortunately, it is your job to play like that. Because if you don't, this team just feels like offensively everything doesn't come as easy when you are not at the top of your game. And so I offer this as a challenge because, again, we have a game in under 48 hours. I offer this as a challenge, Kyle Filipowski. Let's show up and offensively and show the ACC that you are the best player in the ACC. There's a lot of guys right now who could lay claim to that statement, but right now the preseason favorite was you. And I think offensively, he just has found a rut that he's trying to get out of. And I think what's hurting him is that he is not responding to the physicality of this conference.
I would certainly hope that Kyle's up for the game on Monday after what happened in the state of Virginia to him specifically last year. We'll talk more about the Virginia Tech matchup after the break. Rather than focus on negatives from specific people, I want to mention 2 moments in this game that really stuck out to me. Duke was up 5-2, 2 minutes into the game. We're thinking, okay, this is the fastest start this Duke team has gotten out to in a while. I'm already thinking, okay, we're going to talk about how Tyrese starting for the first time in a while was a little bit of a, change in that. That switched on a dime. Jared McCain picked up a really dumb foul at the end of the shot clock. Questionable call. Regardless, he never should have put himself in that situation. After that foul, Clemson goes on an 8-0 run, and it goes from Duke having a 5-2 lead, where maybe we've gotten over this slow start hump, to all of a sudden it's 10-5 Clemson before the first media timeout, and we're in the same situation. We're battling back. The second situation, Duke did battle back. Duke got themselves a 12-point lead with 3 minutes to go. That's when the best Duke teams stretch it out. That's when you get a Cameron goes crazy moment. Duke's up 15 or 20 at half. We're ready to come out of the gate and sort of have that, kill moment and put Clemson out of the game. What happens instead? We have a couple of bad fouls. We send Clemson to the line. Miss a couple threes that are open, good chances. Give up offensive rebounds. All of a sudden, instead of being 32-20 going into the half, it's 32-26. A 6-point deficit is a hell of a lot different than a 12-point deficit. Those 2 moments, to me, sort of epitomize this idea of this coulda, woulda, shoulda have been an easy win for Duke. Duke had the moments where they could have put their foot down and put Clemson out of this game, and they didn't. And if I'm not Coach John Shire for very many reasons, but if I were, that would be my theme over these next 48 hours, which is there has to be a killer instinct in this team. There has to be that instinct to take a 5-point lead and make it a 10-point lead. Take a 12-point lead and make it a 20-point lead. And that's how Duke wins games comfortably, as opposed to biting their nails off and having to rely on the refs making a call down the stretch. That's something that this Duke team, maybe it's still a little bit of youth, maybe it's that inconsistency because of injuries. So another first-time starting lineup, I believe, this week or in this game. I think we've had 5 or 6 different starting lineups so far.
6, yeah.
And I remember in the stats game, I think Jason said there'd only be 1 starting lineup all year. I think he's lost that one by a wide margin at this point.
Well, technically he hasn't, because we said if the 4 guys start, who would start with them, and he said it would always be Jeremy McCain.
Oh,
And to this point, that has remained true. We just haven't seen that lineup in like a month and a half.
okay. So he's staying alive by technicality, but I digress. That's something that this Duke team has to have. If Duke goes into Chapel Hill next week and gets a 5-6 point lead, the difference between winning and losing might be whether they stretch that to 10 or whether they let UNC call timeout, rebound, and follow that up with a run of their own. They've really got to figure out what is that missing piece to having that killer instinct.
I'll tell you one thing it related to that. Again, it kind of relates to an individual player, but it expands to how this team operates. Jeremy Roach, of course, he went down in the Louisville game with an ankle injury after coming back from a knee injury. He ended up playing in this game. He didn't start, as you mentioned, but he came off the bench in the first media timeout. He still played 25 minutes, but he was largely ineffective because of that.
1 of 8.
He was 1 of 8, but also he didn't have the same bounce, right? Like he didn't have the same, he missed a couple free throws. Like it wasn't, he just didn't have the same bounce that we're used to seeing. And because of that, it felt like this team had to go through and find killer instinct from someone else, because he's had it. We've seen it in games where he's taken over down the stretch, but down the stretch, we knew we couldn't necessarily rely on him because he didn't have the same lift. He didn't have the same quickness. He didn't have the same agility. I think the key to this team becoming a good to elite team down the stretch into the postseason is we need to find someone else who has that killer instinct, as you mentioned. We need to find someone else who, again, we always talk about next man up. It needs to be where, hey, if Scott's down, Donald, I got you. Like, I'm good. Like one of those things. Jason's in Antarctica. Scott Rich steps up. I got that killer instinct, right?
There we go.
I got the killer instinct, right? So at the end of the day, that's something that can't be taught. And that's the unfortunate thing. Someone has to, in their mind, go, I'm that dude. I'm him. And it'll emerge in the course of the play. I think the other thing is with Jeremy Roach on the court and him being hobbled by that ankle injury, people were still at first trying to defer to him because they know he's got it, right? And that happens all the time. And it's not necessarily a really bad thing, but it is something that this team needs to overcome in the absence of, their best player when it comes to down the stretch clutch gene. Who else is going to have it? Who's going to step up and provide it? Because if no one else does, you get situations like this. You get situations like the Pitt game. You get situations like, Arkansas, where no one's just there, right? No one's there to back up the person in charge. And all of a sudden, what happens when the substitute shows up? Everyone runs lawless and everyone doesn't have a plan. So I think that's the key here. And this team, I don't think they'll figure it out before tomorrow. That's a lot to ask, but that's something over the next week we definitely need, because as we mentioned, UNC next weekend, there's no room, there's no margin for error in that game. You want where everyone is healthy and on their P's and Q's. And right now, it just feels like offensively, this team is struggling to get everything that they make, which can be a good thing, but you want it to come more easily than this.
One other thing, if we're looking at the, some of the more subplot negatives of this game, I mentioned Sean Stewart's struggles, at least in the second half. Not Ryan Young's best game, but again, I think this was a situation where this wasn't the typical Ryan Young performance. Because of Flip's foul trouble, he was put in for some longer term situations that he normally wouldn't have. But again, 16 minutes, a -7, not his best performance. Caleb Foster struggled a bit, only played 20 minutes, 2 of 6 from the field. Didn't really provide that complement that you would have hoped for when Jeremy Roach was hobbled. But again, we've seen that from Caleb. Caleb has been almost hot or not all year. He's either been scoring 15 points or scoring 2. So I think that's something that we just have to accept at this point, that he's a freshman guard, that's just going to be the Caleb Foster experience as a freshman, which is not a knock. That's not a negative. That's the reality of being a freshman guard playing in the ACC.
I think the other surprising thing is that we didn't see Jalen Blakes at all in this game.
Yeah.
And I think, especially when you think about, again, we just talked about Jeremy Roach clearly being hobbled, but still getting 25 minutes, which I'm okay with, like, I guess, right? Like if Jeremy Roach is in the game, I trust him down the stretch to maybe make a play. But it seemed interesting that we didn't see Jalen Blake's, even if in an effort to conserve some of Jeremy Roach's minutes when he clearly looked like he was laboring a bit, just to get him out of the game, get him some, get some more ice or get some more wrap on that ankle to get him back into the game. I'm surprised Jalen Blake's was a DMP.
I think the one potential explanation for that is defense. We mentioned, defense for the most part wasn't the problem in this game. Offense was, right? And traditionally, we put Jalen Blake's in the game when we need that defensive spark. We had that this game, right? That wasn't the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I was also surprised that he didn't get some spot minutes here or there. But considering it was the offensive struggles, not the defensive struggles, that sort of typified this game, perhaps makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And again, I think, we've seen some offensive output from Jalen Blake's in the past, but it's not as consistent as some of the other guards that we have in the rotation. All right, Scott, we wrap up with the bad. Let's go to play of the game. What's your play of the game? There's a couple plays that probably could do it. I know we got a couple from our listeners, but what's your play of the game?
My big play was the deep three from Tyrese that turned a 57-56 deficit into a 59-57 Duke lead with 6 minutes to go. That was off of a offensive rebound. I forget if it might have been Ryan Young who picked off that offensive board. I forget off the top of my head. But that was a moment where I was watching this game. I said, okay, this is a potential turning point. If Duke doesn't score that possession and Clemson goes down and scores, it's a multi-score game with 6 minutes to go. Things feel a heck of a lot different. Obviously, that sort of got lost in the shuffle with the way that the game did go back and forth, and Duke wasn't able to capitalize off of that momentum, perhaps stretch it into a multi-score game on their count. But if Tyrese doesn't make that very deep end of shot clock style three, we could be looking at a very different last 5 minutes of the game.
It's funny. A lot of people wrote in about that. I thought that was my play of the game. And you mentioned that it was on an offensive rebound. It was on like a air ball that Ryan Young kind of caught. So it doesn't count. We closed with 0 second chance points because it didn't hit the rim and the shot clock was still going. It doesn't count as a second chance three, but it certainly felt like it. And it gave Duke new life as, again, we were battling back and forth. That was a very pivotal possession. I also just want to give a hat tip to Tyrese Proctor's 2 free throws at the end of the game because, hey, look, we're talking about a win today because Tyrese Proctor hit those 2 free throws. So
sometimes the obvious choice is the right choice.
Yeah, so you gotta give it up for that. That's the actual play of the game. But as far as pivotal turning, not necessarily turning point, but a pivotal moment was definitely that 3 as the shot clock kicked 0, where he's fallen away basically into John Shire's arms on the bench. Since this is the last game of the week, we had the Louisville game, we had the Clemson game. We also are giving out Player of the Week honors. I am going to go with Mark Mitchell. Mark Mitchell, you mentioned at the top of the broadcast. 35 points, 18 rebounds, 1 assist, 12 and 2 steals on the week. 11 for 17 from the floor. He hit that 1-3. He was 10 for 13 from the line. He had a terrific week. And again, in a week where it wasn't the 20, I think he had a 20-point output against Louisville, but it wasn't where he had the back-to-back 20-point games. But he provides offense where we need it. He provides defense where we absolutely need it. And he, I thought, was the most consistent player on this week. Who's yours?
So we sort of flipped roles here. You gave me the easy one. The easy answer here is Tyrese Proctor, right? And I think this might be his best 2-game stretch in a Duke uniform. 24 points against Louisville, 18 points, including obviously the 2 most important points against Clemson. But what struck out to me was he's playing much more efficiently. He shot 56% from the field against Louisville, 50% from the field against Clemson, 40% from 3 against Louisville, 66% from 3. He's 4 from 6 from 3 against Clemson. That was huge, huge, huge. Some turnovers, more turnovers than you would normally expect from a Tyrese Proctor. But again, I think that makes sense since he has been shouldering more of a scoring load. Regardless of that, that came to me as I'm just looking at the box score and went from eyes to mouth, even though we're talking about Player of the Week. But that does not that does not undermine the fact that this is perhaps his most impressive 2-game stretch as a Duke Blue Devil. And if we're looking for that guy who is the second option down the stretch, who does have some of that killer instinct, I think the leader in the clubhouse is Tyrese. He's showed that over the last couple of games. He's making more and more clutch shots. And that's something I think we're going to need moving forward as we go into some tough road games, especially this week.
I think it was the first time in his career that he hit 4 threes in consecutive games. So shout out to Tyrese Proctor. I think that's a great pick as well. Hey, let's leave this in the past. We'll take a quick break. On the other side, we traveled down to Virginia Tech in less than 48 hours. What do we need to do to beat the Hokies? Find out after this. All right, we are back, and Scott, we turn our attention to the Virginia Tech Hokies. Of course, we go down to Cassell Coliseum tomorrow night, one of those the first Saturday, Monday turnaround of the year for the Blue Devils. And before we get into Virginia Tech specifically, I want to point out something that I saw on Twitter. Unfortunately, it was from a guy who was linked with Kentucky Sports Radio, but I thought it was a very good stat. Right now, and this was entering yesterday, top 10 teams, AP top 10 teams, of which we will likely be back in the top 10 this week on Monday when this game is played. AP top 10 teams are now 17-27 this year. That is 38.6% on the road against unranked opponents. College basketball is just completely different sport than it has been in the past. If you go back to the 2018-2019 season, 73%. AP top 10 teams won 73% of those games on the road. This year so far, 38.6%. So it's been super hard for teams that are good to win on the road at all in the season. Of course, in the ACC, it's always difficult to win on the road. And especially for Duke, it seems like every time we go down to Cassell Coliseum, we have problems.
I will say, I think the potential explanation for that statistic is with the transfer portal, it's really hard to be a bad high major team nowadays. Potentially Louisville is the exception to the rule, unfortunately for our pal Nolan Smith. But with the way the transfer portal works, you don't have a bad recruiting class and see that effect for multiple years. You don't have a bad year like, for instance, UNC did last year and see that, sit in the program for a couple years, a couple recruiting cycles. If you're a big name, if you have NIL dollars and the big guys in the big conferences have more NIL dollars than the small schools, you can go and get good players. So the difference between the ranked and the unranked teams within the big conferences is much smaller than it ever has been, especially before the NIL transfer portal era, which makes for some more fun basketball. It makes it a lot harder for the Dukes of the world, but it makes for a lot more good basketball that we're watching on a daily basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also means that, a lot of these players just aren't afraid of the big teams, right, when they come to town. So, and Virginia Tech has never been never been a team to shy away from the big moment, especially when Duke comes to Cassell Coliseum. They are 13-7 on the year, 5-4 in the ACC. They're kind of right in the middle of the pack, tied with a bunch of teams at 5-4. They're 51st in KenPom, 54th in the net. Their big wins, they have a few big wins this year. Top 100 KenPom wins: Boise State, Iowa State, Clemson, NC State, and Boston College. Their losses this year are all to teams that are pretty good to really good. South Carolina, FAU, Auburn, Wake Forest. FSU is probably the weakest of that group, Miami and Virginia. So when you look at Virginia Tech in the metrics on offense, they're doing a lot of things right. Effective field goal percentage, they are 57.3%, first of the ACC. They are the second best 3-point shooting team in the conference. They are the second best the best 2-point shooting team in the conference, shooting 56% from 2. They are the best free throw shooting team in the conference. They shoot 82% as a team. I see you shaking your head. That stood out to me. They get to the line, they make their free throws. They move the ball well. 56.1% of their field goals made come with an assist. That's second in the ACC. Now, there are some things they don't do well on offense. They turn the ball over quite a bit. They're second to last in turnover percentage. They turn the ball almost 20% of the time. Offensive rebounding, second to last in the conference. Steal percentage, they don't get a lot of steals. They're 13th in the conference. Non-steal turnover percentage, 8.8%, 13th in the conference. So they turn the ball over quite a bit, and they have found it very difficult to take the ball away from the other team. That has been their issue when it comes to just reaching out on offense and on defense. On defense, again, they have some pretty good stats right here. They hold teams to 32% from three. They make it where teams shoot a lot of threes to kind of get out of that funk. So they lead. They're like third in the conference in teams shooting threes compared to the number of field goals they attempt. But I think it starts with the fact that we have to really shut them down on offense. We cannot have them shooting threes. Hunter Couture, everyone remembers Hunter Couture. We hate that name around here. Like it haunts our dreams from that ACC championship game a couple years back. But Hunter Couture is still on this team. Sean Medulla, Lynn Kidd, Tyler Nickel, MJ Collins. These are guys that are going to be names we hear throughout the course of the broadcast. But the thing about Virginia Tech that strikes me, not just this year, but in years past, is that they somehow, when Enter Sandman comes on in Cassell Coliseum, they flip a switch. And especially in these big moments, when Duke comes to town, they love playing us because they love seizing that moment. We have to seize it right back. And it's super hard for a team. I hate that this is the second of the back-to-back, of the Saturday, Monday back-to-back, because we're coming off a game. Of course, they are coming off the game as well, but we had to battle against Clemson, and now we have to travel down to a place where we traditionally do not play well against a team that always loves to play us well and loves to shoot us out of the gym. This is a game that will get ugly early if Duke does not bring energy from the opening tip. That is without fail. Every single time we play Virginia Tech, we start out slow. They have energy. They gain momentum through guys shooting threes. And then all of a sudden we're playing catch up very quickly. We cannot play catch up against the Hokies.
There are two road games that no matter the season, no matter the timing, if I see that on the schedule, I chalk that up as a loss preseason. And that's at Virginia Tech and that's at NC State. For whatever reason.
We have those games this year. Funny.
Yeah, it's very unfortunate. But those, at least, in my time, analyzing things, have been the two biggest house of horrors for Duke. So like you said, it is very unfortunate timing. Not only is it the quick turnaround game, but it's the trap game before UNC as well. A couple of things about this particular Virginia Tech team give me some inclination that maybe things could be different. The first is this is a very top-heavy Virginia Tech team. The two marquee names that Duke fans know, Sean Pedulla and Hunter Couture, they're shouldering a heck of a lot of the scoring load. Pedulla is almost 16 points a game. Couture is almost 14 points a game. I think we just talked about how Jalen Blakes didn't see the court yesterday. This could be an interesting Jalen Blakes game. This could be an interesting, put Jalen Blakes in, have him just hound Sean Pedulla for 5 minutes at a time. Because you mentioned the turnovers. A lot of those are from Pedulla. He's averaging almost 4 turnovers a game. Now that's partially
the ball's
okay.
In his hand quite a bit too, right?
Exactly.
Like, Hunter Couture is not bringing the ball up and doing like the LeBron James point forward and taking a shot. He's doing the JJ Redick style, moving around the court to try and get open. And he's like, kind of like a Klay Thompson. He will not dribble if he doesn't have to. He's going to try and catch and shoot from 3 every single time.
Exactly. So I think that, that's a potential opportunity for some creative defensive matchups to try to see if we can't force Sean Pedulla into some challenges. The only other guy who's averaging more than 10 points a game is, you mentioned, Lynn Kidd. He's a little bit of an interesting guy when you look at things. He's only playing 24 minutes a game, so he's super efficient. I looked at him. I thought he must have been a transfer because I didn't remember his name much at all last year or the year before. But he's been at Virginia Tech for 3 years. He played in 34 games last year. He was just, though, another bench body. He was only averaging 13 minutes a game. He averaged 5 points a game on the year. But man, has he taken things up another notch this year. Like I said, 14 points a game in 24 minutes. He has been super, super efficient and provided them a bit of an inside presence that we sort of don't typically associate with Virginia Tech. The thing that gives me a little bit of optimism going into this game is that there's a huge drop-off on this Hokie team after those three guys. Their fourth leading scorer, Tyre Nickel, who we might recall used to wear a particularly ugly shade of blue. He's averaging 9 points a game. He's shooting well. He's shooting almost 40% from three. That was his scouting report going into his time at UNC. Below that, no one's averaging more than 6 points a game. The other thing, no one's averaging more than 4.1 rebounds a game. Outside of Kidd, this is a very sort of, dispersed rebounding team. This is a very sort of dispersed scoring team outside of those top 3 or 4. So this is an opportunity for Coach Shire to give Tyrese Proctor the Sean Padula matchup, to give Jared McCain the Hunter Couture matchup, and really challenge them to shut guys down defensively. I would not be shocked if those are the matchups going in, because Tyrese's length can give a guy like Padula trouble, and we've seen Jared just be an energizer bunny running all over the floor defensively. If anyone is going to guard the Klay Thompson type role that Couture serves, I think McCain might be able to do that. This is a game I think will be one on the defensive end. Duke can score. Kyle Filipowski should have plus matchups in this game. Mark Mitchell will almost certainly have plus matchups in this game. There really isn't a true power forward type, or especially a power forward type that can guard off the dribble, that can match up with Mark Mitchell. Offensively, I'm not overly worried. It's defensively. Can Duke prevent those crazy, 3-point shooting barrages that Virginia Tech is prone to? If Duke can come out and make someone else beat them, make someone besides Padula or Couture beat Duke, much easier said than done, much easier said on a podcast than done on the floor. Mm-hmm. But if Duke can do that, this becomes a winnable game.
So you mentioned some of the matchups, right? And I think one thing to note is that Virginia Tech is much smaller than some of the teams that we have seen in the past couple of weeks. Sean Batula is 6'1", Lynn Kidd 6'10", Hunter Couture is 6'3", Tyler Nichols 6'7", MJ Collins is 6'4". After that, you have a couple of guys that are 6'9", but really Lynn Kidd is far and away the biggest guy they have on the roster. That means that I kind of expect us to start out at least the game very small, right? We're going to have the 4-guard set up with Kyle Filipowski in the middle. Mark Mitchell will kind of be that wing guy. Mark Mitchell is going to be the X factor here on offense, especially again if he gets out to those hot starts that we've been seeing from him in the last few games, get 10 points in the first half just by being open. That's going to be great. But I think the key, as you mentioned, is on defense. Our guys are going to have to come in. I think we will see Jalen Blakes in this game as opposed to against Clemson, because I think, like you said, he matches up quite well with some of the guards, and he can just get in somebody's grill and never leave their sight. I think also an X factor in this game, when he does come into the game, is Sean Stewart. I think Sean Stewart would match up very well with some of these bigs that they have. I say bigs in air quotes because, again, after Lynn Kidd, they don't really have a lot of length. I think that is where he can come in and maybe show some athleticism to kind of hold the paint down when guys need to take a rest. The one thing that I do not want to see us do is get into foul trouble, because again, it seems like against Virginia Tech, we always have some key player in foul trouble, and that alters the lineup every single time. I want to, again, when we have the fast start and we have the energy, that's one thing, but we also need to keep our guys on the floor, because if we do, these rotations work in our favor. But if you get a Kyle Filipowski out of the game or something like that, these rotations change drastically, and that advantage would then go to Virginia Tech.
And you mentioned this, the insane free throw percentage numbers that this team has as a team. But I want to reemphasize that, because it's pretty nuts. Virginia Tech's top 6 scorers are all shooting higher than 80% from the free throw line. Their worst free throw shooter amongst their top 7 scorers is Potat, who's shooting 75% from the free throw line. Lynn Kidd, their center, is 88% from the free throw line. These are abnormal numbers. And this is something where the worst case scenario for Duke is if we get in foul trouble early, not only because of what it does to our player availability, but if we put the Hokies in the bonus, that's not a good sign. We're not going to get many missed front ends of 1-and-1s that are going to give us some free possessions. That's not going to happen against this team the way they shoot free throws. That's something that is such an outlier in the modern game of college basketball that I think it really bears emphasis. It's something that makes it, if this is a close game down the stretch, you don't want to be coming back against a Virginia Tech team. You're not going to make up much ground if you're having to foul them under a minute to go.
And I think the key for that, right, is they're not actively seeking to go to the line, right? It's not like they're just hunting for to get fouled so they can go to the line and hit these free throws. They're still in the course of their offense, but when you do foul them, yeah, they're going to the line, they're making their free throws, and so we don't want to get into a game where we're getting and sending them to the line too many times, because they're going to knock them all down. Those are just free points that we're giving them, and that again keeps them close. So I hope the energy's there. Again, I hope we stay out of foul trouble. And really, I think for certain key guys, if we can get them active early on offense, that will set the tone for the game and make Virginia Tech have to adjust to what we're doing. We take the game to them, not the other way around. So again, that is on Monday night. I think it's an ESPN game, but Monday night, 7:00, we are at Virginia Tech. Scott, anything else before we get up out of here?
This is going to be a big week, sir. This is the week where we see whether this Duke team has what it takes to meet the lofty aspirations that we saw preseason. And it may not even be, I'm going to be honest, it may not even be wins and losses this week. I think we're going to learn a lot about this Duke team in terms of how they perform and 2 road games that on paper you might be able to chalk up as losses. There's a big difference between this Duke team going 1-1 this week and that loss being a close loss versus going 1-1 or 0-2 where we just get blown out of the building in one or both of these games. And that's a possibility. We talked about the history against Virginia Tech. UNC is playing real well. So this is something where, again, you guys are going to preview the UNC game more in detail later, but we're going to learn a lot about this team this week. And it's something that we might look back on in 6 weeks when we're going into March Madness and saying, this is when this Duke team either turned on the Jets or this is when this Duke team sort of became what it was.
Yeah, it's as the calendar switches from January to February, it feels like the true midpoint of the ACC slate of games. And yeah, very fewer bigger weeks than this one, especially, again, you go to Virginia Tech, you go to UNC in the same week. Again, I know there'll be a 5-day break between those 2 games, but yeah, this is a huge week to show everyone where Duke basketball really is at this point in the season and what they need to do to stay right at the top of the standings in the ACC. But that will do it for episode number 587 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Scott, Rich, as always, thank you for joining me, man. Appreciate you. Happy
Thanks
Sunday.
for having me. Go Lions.
Go Lions, ladies and gentlemen. We will be back very, very soon. After it will be probably on Tuesday to recap the Virginia Tech game. But until then, he's Scott Rich. I'm Donald Wine. And for Jason Evans, somewhere in Antarctica, this is now the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.